Gary Maduris, good to see you again.
Yes. Hi, Dean. Good to see
Hi.
you too.
An acoustic specialist, that's your role at Rockfont.
Correct.
So what's your day-to-day like?
Oh, it really varies. I work with our sales managers, helping architects, designers, specifiers understand how to use our acoustical products, where to use them, which ones are best for their particular application. So a lot of time spending reviewing reflected ceiling plans and maybe doing some reverberation time calculations, and providing that assistance to correctly apply our products in their designs.
Oh, cool. So
Fun stuff.
yeah, no, but every day is a little different, different projects. You keep growing.
Yeah, Rockfon is growing and hiring, and we're I can't say we're new to North America anymore because we were new sort of in the 2013 and 2014 era. So definitely becoming more of a staple in the design world and more well known, seeing our products applied in different types of projects and more projects. So yeah, good time.
Oh, very good. So if we could focus in on speech privacy and how you approach that. And we could talk about like open spaces, but there's a craving for speech privacy, especially now, and having that, the things that you don't want everyone hearing,
Right,
uh, no matter what, an office, in a healthcare facility, library, anywhere.
right. The Center for the Built Environment at UC Berkeley keeps a huge database of post-occupancy building surveys. Building gets constructed, everybody occupies it, they will administer surveys and ask questions whether people are satisfied or dissatisfied with access to light and space and color, and actually one of the line items is sound privacy. Another one is noise levels. And they rank these and they publish papers. So I would encourage anybody, if they're interested in these, do Google, Center for the Built Environment, and you can type in acoustics or light or whatever. And uh, invariably, the three lowest scoring, meaning highly dissatisfied factors, are noise levels, temperature, and sound privacy. So it is appropriate that we're talking about this sound privacy topic.
I would say that again. So there's three different ones. Say it again.
The most dissatisfaction that comes from this is data driven, right? These surveys of building occupants, sound privacy, noise levels, and temperature. So people are either too hot or too cold. They don't feel that they can have a conversation privately. They feel like everybody can hear their, you know, while we're not supposed to always, spend a lot of time at work with personal conversations, right? But a doctor calls with test results, or your parents, you need to talk to your parents about something. They're elderly. That's personal information, and you want to be able to know that, when you have those need to have those conversations, that everybody in the office doesn't know your business, right? Um, and then the last one is just noise levels, right? Temperature, overall noise levels. Oh, I can't think in here. It's so loud, and I'm always stressed, and my muscles are tense, and I'm just fatigued at the end of the day. I can't go home and enjoy my evening because I've been stressed out all day long. So yeah, you need to think about those three things in particular when you're trying to create overall or higher satisfaction in your building designs.
You
It's
know, as a,
low hanging fruit, as they say.
yeah, but like um, as a manager in the past, those critical conversations have been difficult depending on the room. Right? And a lot of times you'll go somewhere else to have a critical conversation instead of because of the echoing or your office isn't that well considered on how you have that.
Right. That's a key problem with this speech privacy is that a room that looks like it's providing speech privacy might not necessarily be doing that. A prime example is, back in the 80s and 90s when there was a building boom, someone thought it was a good idea to stop the walls right above or at the line of the suspended acoustic ceiling and not run it all the way up. So there's this space, they call it open plenum, right above the ceiling, where if you go in the room, you take out a ceiling tile, you stick your head up, you can see all the way across the building, and if someone were to do that in another room, you'd be looking, there's no wall above that ceiling. So that's, one of the design practices that, are no longer allowed in the standards, guidelines, and rating systems because, over time we've just learned that it's sort of giving a false impression of speech privacy when in fact, you're not obtaining it at all.
Right. Right. So that's our reference point is the bad ones. So in theory, 'cause we're obsessed at Commark on one of these things is that um, how do architects add value to the assets the owners and developers are wanting to construct? Right? Besides great design, what are other thoughtful aspects? What you're talking about that fits that, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, sustainability um, is here to stay. And, we're only going to see more and more sustainable practices. But often when I say sustainable, um, I think people think, water efficiency, low energy usage, low impact on the environment. All of those things are absolutely important, and I encourage those. But ultimately, I think a building is only sustainable if it can function for the people that are in it and the next people that are going to occupy it and the next people that are going to occupy it. Poorly designed buildings, even if they're not impacting the environment that much or energy uses that much, if they're torn down or have to be constantly renovated because the acoustics are so bad or it's hot or too hot or too cold and you can't control the temperature, to me, sustainability really means used decade after decade successfully by high number. I think of human capital when I think sustainability.
Interesting. Okay. So wait, to go back where I was going is convincing an owner developer that putting in like really providing quite a bit of attention to acoustics will actually raise the value of that asset to them and their portfolio.
I would think so. I'm an acoustician, not an economist. But ultimately, the higher quality, whatever you have, right, raises its value, particularly amongst older building stock that you can clearly differentiate yourself from with higher quality. But yeah, higher acoustic quality, maybe longer tenant leases. If it's a leasable type situation, and a developer with a multiple building portfolio, something that they can tout. The construction, the acoustic quality, and um, how efficient and productive the workforce or whomever's occupying it can be.
Yeah, it just seems like another brilliant way to make sure that your cost per square foot can be raised because you're giving additional value.
Right. And, right now, particularly over the next 3 years, we're very low on employment. There's still excess building stock, right? So one of those ways to make your property more valuable is to pay attention to the acoustics and provide the speech intelligibility in places like conference room, and then speech privacy in places like open offices.
So if we could talk about like this very, we're talking about the concepts and all, but going really to a practical level of um, high absorption surfaces, masking sounds. What now we're making decisions about products that go into that building. Can you give an idea of what those product selections are and how that impacts it?
Sure, absolutely. So sound interacts with an architectural surface in only a couple of ways. So if it's very hard, reflective, non-porous, think glass and metal and stone, the sound's going to reflect off it. If it's porous, soft, so we're talking fabrics, upholstery, acoustic ceiling tiles, carpet, fabric wrapped wall panels, those are all porous, and the sound energy um, gets inside of the materials, the fibers, and gets converted to heat. So it doesn't reflect off, it's absorbed. So those are the sort of the categories. And particularly when you're dealing with speech privacy, for example, in open office situations, the more the absorption, the better. And particularly the ceiling absorption, because whether there's cubicles or not blocking the direct sound, nothing blocks that reflection off the ceiling. And generally, the standards, guidelines, and rating systems require an absorption level. It's characterized by noise reduction coefficient, NRC. We want the NRC, per these standards, guidelines, and rating systems, to be 0.90, basically 90% absorptive or higher. That's what's considered high performing. But like any other thing, there's low performing options and moderate performing options and high performing options. So as architects, designers, specifiers start thinking about, okay, this is a speech privacy space, an open office, and I want to do the right thing. I want to increase the asset value for my client, my developer. And then ultimately the comfort level for the building occupants. They need to be thinking higher NRC, particularly 0.9 or higher. And there's plenty of options. I mean, that's just not limiting you to Rockfon. You can do that with multiple materials and different aesthetics and different format sizes and different colors. So I'm not trying to steer the conversation in one particular way.
Yeah.
Really should be thinking about high NRC ceilings, and then if possible, other absorption as well.
Wait. So you said color. So I have to ask, how does color play into all this?
It doesn't affect acoustics as much, but a lot of times, I think, particularly, maybe a decade ago, people equated high NRC, particularly ceilings, with limited options. I can only go with this material, and they're only available in this size, and I'm going to end up with an undesired, and they're only available in white. So the reason I brought up color was, if someone's been around in the design world for multiple decades and they still have that idea that high NRC limits their design options, that's what I'm trying to say, is it really doesn't anymore.
Got it.
You can go
Well,
with
that
different
makes
core materials, and you can go with a 2x6 offset panels and, conceal the grid or not conceal. All that doesn't affect the acoustics, but I'm just saying you can get you can get the aesthetic you want with that high NRC these days. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Okay, so taking again more practical, let's say, well, here, I'll throw this at you. So we did a tour of a new elementary school that's just absolutely beautiful in Rockford. And they had a really interesting approach in that the classroom is one area, and then there isn't a hallway right outside. Instead, there's another room outside. So if you're called out of the class, it's not the humiliation. Instead, it's just another area of conversation into the hallways. It was very like how they went into the kids' minds and comfort levels and stuff was really interesting. So if we looked at it though, the classroom has one type of acoustics, right? And that next one might be for a private conversation, or maybe it's for reading, that, and then you have the open space.
Right.
How, give an idea on how you would approach that when working with a school to make sure that they could achieve that.
Yeah. Well, that type of open environment, is probably a little more discouraged than encouraged from the acoustics point of view, because those hard physical barriers are very effective at stopping sound. But we understand, even in the open office environment, like open office schools, there needs to be zoning. Think about what is the acoustic zones. You mentioned two good ones, right? There's a place where students are coming together to, learn, hear the teacher, interact. That's one acoustic zone, and then maybe another one where private teaching is going on, or discipline is going on, or what they call behavior modification, and maybe those need to be further distanced apart. And you need more absorption, higher NRC ceilings in the speech privacy, right? The ceiling comes down, it's a little smaller, it's a little further away, that acoustic zone versus the other acoustic zone, the teaching zone. where maybe things are a little bit more reflective. You drop the NRC down to 0.8, and there's some good wall reflections, helping to sort of amplify the teacher's voice in a good way. So that's one of the strategies. It's called acoustic zoning, and changing the materials up and the size of those spaces appropriately. Works in open office too.
Makes total sense. That kind of environment could. There's so many scenarios it works in.
Right.
Um, so if we were to put together a checklist of things that someone should be cognizant of when they're thinking about increasing speech privacy in open spaces, what would that include?
Well, by far the first thing is occupant density. And can you control that? Because if you put a flat floor and no physical barriers and say, okay, client, here you go, here's your big open space, I guarantee you they will jam as many people as physically possible in that space. And I like to talk about acoustic occupancy similar to fire occupancy, right? Your fire marshal comes in and says there should be no more than 100 people in this space. And generally, I think the fire occupancy is about twice what the acoustic occupancy is, meaning that take that and divide it by 2. There really should only be 50 people in there from an acoustics perspective. And that's the sort of disparity in the design world. So the designer could think, you know, we're going down this checklist, and number one is occupant density. What can I do to potentially limit that? Right? Are there some hard physical barriers? Are there zones? We talked about zoning that they need to work with, right? Or do I want to talk through furniture layouts, furniture styles and types to limit how many people they keep jamming in the space? So that's number one. Number 2 would be the size of the room, particularly the volume, the height, because that loudness and reverberance factor depends on the size of the room, right? We've all been in a large church or gymnasium with huge volume and reflective surfaces. It's very loud, it's very reverberant, uncomfortable. It's great for a basketball game for a couple hours, but you wouldn't want to work in there every day. So make the room as small as practical. Don't oversize the room. You know, and unfortunately, one of the styles now is let's convert this 30-foot high warehouse into an open office.
Right, it looks so cool.
It looks very cool, but it is so loud and so reverberant and hard to control because it's way more volume than's necessary. So that has to do with, you know, ceiling height and picking the right um, spaces for the right functions. Then continuing down the checklist, the third thing would be absolutely the absorption properties of the finishes, primarily the ceiling. The ceiling is the largest, most exposed surface, and it's out of harm's way, unlike floor materials and wall materials. Really, what that means is they need to be less durable, they can be less expensive, but then high performing. And you know, as I mentioned, the noise reduction coefficient for those products is how much the sound gets absorbed. It really should be 0.9 or higher in these spaces where you want privacy and noise control when these spaces are open. Yeah.
So that's the checklist. That's what we should be thinking about.
Well, you know, the fourth one probably would be background sound, and it's you know, a lot of people don't think about it, but if you don't design your background sound level, then you're left with whatever's left over. And in speech privacy, you know, we mentioned signal to noise ratio in the previous podcast, where in speech intelligibility, you're trying to increase the signal and decrease the noise, and that creates speech intelligibility. In the speech privacy, it's the exact opposite. You want to decrease the signal and you want to increase the noise. But you want to increase the noise in a comfortable and controllable way, in uniform way. So we don't want to, you know, create some buzzing or alarm or something that's disconcerting. We want something that's sort of benign and non-informational. And a good example is a water feature. right? We'll see a water feature in a hospital waiting room, and it's sort of soothing, and it's background sound. You're making the room louder, but you're doing it in a way that is positive and comfortable in providing speech privacy. But we were talking about open offices, right? And you don't see too many waterfalls in open offices, even though there are some good companies now actually designing water features for open office application. That the standard is electronic sound masking. So that's speakers and amplifiers concealed out of visual out of vision, and it's producing sort of a background sound, right? And it's making it harder to understand or get disturbed by conversations and speech and so forth.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome. It was fun.